I knew the axe was falling the moment Victor Lang set my quarterly security audit aside without finishing it, his eyes glued to his phone as he nodded at whatever his assistant was murmuring. The conference room smelled of fresh espresso and expensive cologne, the kind that clung to everything in our downtown San Francisco offices. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the fog rolled in over the bay, but inside it felt colder. Victor chuckled at something on his screen. Probably another glowing article about his digital transformation initiatives. I sat across from him, badge still clipped to my blazer. The one I'd earned over 13 grueling years building the very systems keeping Vanguard secure systems compliant across state lines and international borders. He called me the encryption specialist, the quiet one who handled the legacy stuff. That morning he joked in front of the entire engineering floor, "You're basically our digital janitor, Elena, sweeping up the messes so the rest of us can shine." Everyone laughed politely. I smiled back and said, "Exactly, because arguing would have been pointless." Victor had no idea what I actually swept or how many nights I'd spent alone patching vulnerabilities his flashy DevOps hires had introduced, or how the Nexus Compliance Vault, the NCV I designed, kept our financial data, client ledgers, and regulatory records breathing in real time across California, New York, Texas, Illinois, and mirrored nodes in compliant jurisdictions. 13 years. I never demanded promotions or complained when deadlines crushed weekends. When my mother passed away in Seattle, I flew back overnight and rerouted international handshake protocols from a hotel lobby just so the Illinois node didn't fail its SOX audit. Victor never noticed. To him, I was outdated. Pre-cloud. Someone to flatten out during his org chart reorganizations. He announced we were eliminating credential redundancies to streamline operations. What he really meant was revoking access for people he didn't value, cutting what he called bloat without understanding the architecture underneath. I stayed silent. I kept my notes pristine, my logs mirrored, my permissions shadowed exactly as protocol demanded. In meetings I nodded when they preached zero trust, buzzwords pulled from consultant decks, even though their version ignored the living compliance ecosystem I'd engineered. The NCV wasn't flashy dashboards or AI hype. It was a protocol-driven fortress with time-delayed ledger wipes, jurisdictional certificate rotations every 72 hours, and fail-safes that whispered rather than screamed when something went wrong. I'd written Section 4.7c myself during a brutal 12-week push to align with evolving data privacy laws. No one read the fine print. They never did. By the third month of Victor's reign, I'd been quietly removed from key threads, looped in late on security reviews, and sidelined during compliance briefings. They assumed I'd already checked out emotionally. That was their first mistake. You don't dismantle a system by flipping a switch. You unravel it by removing the one person who understood where the logic lived. I began preparing without fanfare, exporting clean manifests, scheduling my own token revocations with a 48-hour buffer. Not sabotage. Restraint. Letting their momentum carry them toward the edge they couldn't see. The memo arrived at 9:17 a.m. on a crisp Tuesday. Subject: Credential Audit Findings. No greeting. Just bullets from a fresh-faced auditor Victor recruited from a boutique firm that specialized more in sleek presentations than forensic depth. His name was Ryan, but he signed emails like he was branding energy drinks. He flagged my root-level shadow access as excessively permissive and suggested revoking it for modernization. Victor replied 2 minutes later. Lock it down. Too many old dependencies tied to her role. No questions. No technical deep dive. Just an executive hammer swing at infrastructure he never bothered to learn. I didn't argue. I opened my local vault, exported the permissions manifest one last time, and queued the revocation job. 48 hours. Enough time for the absence to register on the next integrity sweep and prove the access wasn't legacy, it was foundational. The deeper pain wasn't anger, it was clarity. They'd wanted efficiency. They were about to learn what efficiency without wisdom really cost. I spent that night finalizing my personal archive index, 230 pages of meticulously annotated deployment trees, hash tables, certificate expiration maps, and every executive signature approving the safeguards. Victor's initials appeared twice, once blessing the core protocol, once granting me continuity authority across jurisdictions. I labeled the folder something innocuous, Legacy Protocol Index. They ignored it. As expected. Friday came. The office hummed with casual energy, people planning happy hours, weekend getaways to Napa. I stayed late, clearing alert thresholds, freezing export queues without deleting anything, just pausing the hands of the clock. At 6:08 p.m., Victor appeared in my doorway flanked by legal counsel, two stone-faced associates who avoided my eyes. Victor stood center, arms crossed, smirking like he'd won a boardroom victory. "Elena, you've been terminated effective immediately for unauthorized duplication of company assets." The accusation hung there, dressed up in corporate legalese to justify what was really a power move. I could have demanded details, proof, an investigation. Instead, I slid my badge across the desk calmly. "Check the logs Monday," I said, voice steady. Victor frowned, unsettled by my lack of protest. "What logs?" I met his gaze. "You'll know them when you don't see them anymore. No tears. No scene." I walked out into the sharp evening air of the financial district. Phone buzzing with a text from an old colleague. "Still holding Vanguard together?" I replied simply, "Not anymore." She sent a spinning rocket gif. I sat in my car a long while, engine off, listening to the silence I'd earned. Not regret, not spite, just the clean precision of someone who'd been precise when others were reckless. The first crack appeared Saturday morning at 10:14 a.m., a handshake loop failure on the Illinois node. An alert pinged Victor's new infrastructure lead, a confident cloud architect who'd once dismissed our older systems as security blankets for the risk-averse. She messaged the team, "Looks like an expired cert." Clearing it, they tried. But it wasn't just expired. It was designed to become irrecoverable once the triggering protocol activated. Those mirrored nodes weren't relics. They were governance witnesses. Time-gated validators bound to regulatory statutes in multiple states. If one went dark without proper succession, the others followed by design. It was compliance discipline, not drama. I imagine the Slack channels lighting up, Ryan pacing with his marker, Victor demanding quick fixes. Legal emailed the compliance alias demanding logs of all duplication activity tied to my old user ID. They didn't realize that ID had already sunset per the very revocation rules they'd failed to document fully. The Vault backup jobs lived inside a token cycle requiring credential attestation every 72 hours. My departure triggered Vault decay mode. Throughout the weekend they pulled data, trying to isolate what they labeled unauthorized mirrors. Their language revealed everything. You recover true redundancy. You don't isolate it unless it's critical and now missing. By Sunday morning, the New York mirror expired. Timestamped validation calls began spinning in loops, thousands of them chasing certificate chains that no longer existed. The system didn't crash spectacularly, it stalled with patient permanence. An APAC compliance officer forwarded an urgent note through legal, Vault's invalid. No fallback noted. ITA? Marked high priority. No one responded because no one knew how. They still called it an anomaly internally, hoping for a misconfigured job or overlooked webhook. Victor pushed for a clean rollback to default state. That request reached me via screenshot from a quiet loyalist. I almost laughed. There was no default. The NCV had no simple undo. That was the point of irreversible ledgers built for trust in high-stakes finance. One by one the mirrors went silent. Dashboards refreshed to partial syncs where green status had always glowed. A manual override attempt using an old cached master token triggered a failsafe audit sequence, locking the node and alerting the Illinois Archive Authority remotely. Sunday night, someone messaged the infrastructure chain desperately, "Has anyone located the primary credential cascade route?" No one had. The cracks remained quiet, prolonged. Unrelenting silence born of abandonment. Not malfunction. They'd called it streamlining. Monday arrived brittle and too still. Like power outage in a server farm where no one dared flip the switch. At 7:09 a.m., outage alerts hit the Western teams. Then East Coast. Then international mirrors. By 7:41 a.m., 3 regions raised internal breach level flags. No actual breach, just emptiness where the vaults used to validate. Clients panicked first. Reconciliation couldn't decrypt prior ledger blocks. Daily hash checks returned blank. Secure transactions flagged corrupted because certificate validation failed. A junior intern keyword searched vault expiry in the archives and unearthed an untouched 8-year-old PDF. Digitally signed and notarized. Page 68. Section 4.7c. If administrator access to mirrored NCV nodes is revoked without substantiated and documented misconduct, all linked certificates shall expire within 72 hours. Vault access shall not be recoverable. Mirrored node shall decay, per jurisdictional policy. The intern flagged it in Slack. At first silence. Then audit clicked through, froze, and pulled legal and risk in. Victor tried pivoting, escalate to engineering, roll forward a vault seed. But seeding required jurisdictional attestation, now impossible with the Illinois node dead. The architecture's whole purpose was irreversibility. You don't unbake bread after the oven cools. It wasn't a heist or revenge. It was the exact protocol they had approved and never read. The intern asked nervously in the thread, "Does this mean we did this to ourselves?" No one replied. Tuesday brought a flood of client emails escalating from polite nudges to urgent demands. Subject lines grew sharper. Ledger inconsistency. Missing transaction records. Failed sync across ledgers. Our largest institutional client, Pacific Capital Partners, copied legal. Risk. And the CEO lost 7 days of verifiable data. Resolve by close of business or we notify regulators and suspend integrations. Legal unsealed my old archive folder, labeled boringly as Protocol Changelog Index. Inside, 230 pages of root tables, merge protocols, expiration maps, deployment trees, and the color-coded dependency ledger with every executive signature, including Victor's twice. Someone printed the packet and placed it before him. He skimmed, mouth tightening. When asked about hash cycle parity, he deflected. "That's engineering, ask DevOps." But DevOps had been downsized in his efficiency drive. Page 81 explained it clearly with screenshots and a red note. No recovery option available without parity attestation from live mirror nodes. In other words, no way back. A client success manager remembered me explaining the New York compliance loop over coffee years earlier, like a regulatory time capsule. Victor read further. Growing pale. Everything documented. Every rule. Every safeguard. None malicious. All protocol. His signatures bound the system. His ignorance made it irreversible. By 2 p.m. Tuesday, the fire spread externally. Integration partners froze access, pending recovery status. Regulators sent soft but ominous inquiries about continuity of compliance mirrors under NCV protocol. Victor asked if they could simply reassign my credentials. Ryan tried generating a temporary override. The system responded coldly. Credential expired. Linked nodes decayed. Protocol cycle complete. A console note I'd left years earlier appeared, and CV compliance is not a feature. It is a contract. Violating it doesn't break the system. It ends it. Chaos logged itself immutably, not to sabotage, but to neglect. The only person who could fix it was the one they'd let go with a smirk. I hadn't taken data. I'd simply removed my name from the access list. Wednesday morning news alerts showed Vanguard climbing industry forums and investor threads. Vault meltdown at Vanguard Secure Systems. Compliance failure tied to missing architect. Certificate blackout threatens ledgers. I scrolled calmly over coffee, letting the internet speculate. The real drama unfolded in their war room, conference room overlooking the bay. PowerPoint useless against protocol. The board convened. Some remote. Victor wore his usual Navy suit but looked diminished. He blamed process gaps. Over-reliance on legacy personnel. A culture of unnecessary complexity. The outside compliance consultant, a calm mid-50s woman with tortoiseshell glasses and librarian poise, leaned forward. She flipped through the rollout charter. Who signed the deployment authorization? Silence. She tapped. Initials here, Mr. Lang? Another silence. And who approved Section 4.7c binding the jurisdictional vault structure to administrator continuity? Victor shifted. Reviewed during original rollout.
No, she said gently.
Signed by you twice. The room's air thickened. You empowered the system to enforce consequences when misused. This isn't complexity. This is accountability. That evening, an email arrived from Interim General Counsel, consulting opportunity. Urgent response requested. Polite. Professional. Offering discretion. Control. Compensation given my unique familiarity with NCV protocols. I didn't reply. The system had already spoken in the language they couldn't twist, compliance itself. Thursday brought no explosions, only a slow cave-in. At 8:01 a.m., Pacific Capital Partners paused operations. Reconciliation froze. Clients stopped receiving confirmations. By 10 a.m., 12 major clients across 3 time zones halted activity, citing security or noncompliance. Legal issued an internal statement claiming temporary syncing delays due to unexpected certificate expiration. A fragile lie. Breach notices followed, each carrying contractual penalties. One regulator asked pointedly, what was the documented rationale for terminating the credentialed vault administrator associated with NCV mirrors? Not why the system failed. Why fire the person whose credentials kept it legal? That question implied liability. At 11:39 a.m., Victor's inbox received. Final vault cycle triggered. Attachment. 4.7c execution notice. Single paragraph. Per authorized NCV protocol section 4.7c. Linked ledger mirrors have expired due to absence of documented misconduct tied to credential revocation. Reinstatement not permitted. Certificates invalid. This action final. Signed original architect. No new signature, just the protocol they approved. Victor called an emergency meeting. No one answered. Calendars locked. Out of office replies multiplied. Friday settled into earned stillness. I sat by my window, chamomile tea steeping slowly, the same ritual I'd used to think through protocol logic years earlier. Headline scrolled. Vanguard faces multi-client lawsuits over ledger collapse. Termination of vault architect raises liability questions. NCV mirrors deemed unrecoverable. Regulatory hearings ahead. Articles quoted analysts and anonymous sources. My name stayed absent. Which was the point? The erased woman had become the silent origin of every reaction, like a fingerprint visible only under right light. A recruiter pinged. Subject Dax. Wait. NCV Vault Inquiry. Availability to consult? Polite. Researched. Referencing patents. Decay Windows. Even quoting an old dry panel talk. asked if I was the original architect behind 4.7c. I replied only in subject. Be sure they read section 4.7c next time. I closed the tablet, sipped tea, and smiled quietly. They had called it theft and duplication. Termination justified.
But I stole nothing.
I sabotaged nothing. I obeyed the charter they forgot approving, signed, certified, compliant. Year after year of delegated permissions and protocols handed willingly. All I did was lift my hands from the wheel. The system executed exactly as instructed by them. In the end, I never raised my voice, slammed doors, or threatened. I simply followed the rules they wrote off as redundant. The company learned the hard way. The scariest breach isn't external theft. It's internal neglect of the quiet architects who hold the logic together. They mistook my silence for weakness, my precision for passivity. When the lights went out, they had no one left who understood what they'd broken. Weeks blurred. Lawsuits mounted. Board meetings turned tense. Victor's position grew precarious as fingers pointed inward. Offers to consult escalated in urgency and compensation. I declined each one. Not out of vengeance, I had moved on. Consulting independently for smaller firms that valued documentation from day one. Vanguard's collapse wasn't my doing, it was the natural consequence of their choices. The NCV did what it was engineered to do, protect integrity even from its own stewards when safeguards were ignored. I often thought about the junior intern who found the PDF, or the client success manager who remembered my coffee explanation. Small moments where people began seeing the human cost behind streamlining. Victor eventually left under pressure. New leadership promised audits and knowledge transfer programs. Too late for those lost clients and damaged trust. Sitting here now, years later, the question lingers. In our rush for efficiency and shiny transformations, how often do we discard the very people and protocols keeping everything standing? The system didn't scream when abandoned. It simply obeyed its own rules with quiet finality. And in that silence, the real cost became undeniable. What would you have done in my place? Speak up louder earlier. Or let the protocol speak for itself when the time came. The answer haunts boardrooms still. Respect the architecture. Or watch it walk away with everything it once held together.